The concert hall buzzed with excitement as people filled every seat. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light on the polished wooden floors. Women wore elegant dresses and men straightened their ties. Everyone had come to see Marcus Wellington, the most celebrated pianist in the country. His concerts always sold out within hours, and tonight was no different. Sarah Chen stood at the back entrance of the hall, clutching a worn leather folder against her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched the crowd through a small window in the door. She had traveled 3 hours by bus to get here, spending money she barely had on the ticket. At 23 years old, Sarah worked 2 jobs to support herself and her younger brother. During the day, she cleaned offices in the downtown business district. At night, she waited tables at a small diner near her apartment. But music was her true passion. Ever since she was 7 years old and found an old keyboard at a thrift store, Sarah had been teaching herself to play. She had no money for lessons, no fancy teachers, and certainly no connections in the classical music world. What she did have was determination, and hundreds of hours spent watching online tutorials, studying sheet music from the library, and practicing on that same old keyboard until her fingers ached. Tonight, Sarah had a plan. She had heard that Marcus Wellington sometimes held brief meet-and-greet sessions after his performances. She hoped to catch him for just a few minutes to show him a composition she had written. Maybe, just maybe, he would listen. Maybe he would see something in her music that could change her life. The lights dimmed and the audience fell silent. Marcus Wellington walked onto the stage with confident strides. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with silver hair swept back from his forehead, and an expensive suit that fit him perfectly. He sat at the grand piano without acknowledging the applause, positioning his hands over the keys with practiced precision. Then he began to play. The music filled the hall like water filling a glass. Sarah closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. She recognized the piece immediately, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Marcus played it flawlessly, his fingers dancing across the keys with effortless grace. Every note was perfect, every crescendo timed to perfection. The audience sat mesmerized, barely breathing. Sarah felt both inspired and intimidated. How could she ever hope to reach that level of skill? She had taught herself everything she knew, piecing together knowledge from YouTube videos and library books. Marcus had probably studied at the finest conservatories in the world, trained by masters who had trained under other masters. The gap between them seemed impossibly wide. When the concert ended, the audience erupted in applause. Marcus stood and bowed, his expression neutral but satisfied. He performed 2 encores before finally leaving the stage. Sarah waited nervously as the crowd began to disperse. She made her way toward the stage door, where a security guard stood with crossed arms. "Excuse me?" Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is Mr. Wellington meeting with anyone tonight?" The security guard looked her up and down, taking in her simple jeans and faded jacket. "Do you have a VIP pass?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No, but I just need 5 minutes. I have something to show him. Sorry, miss. VIP pass holders only. You can try reaching out to his management company." The guard turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Sarah felt her heart sink, but she refused to give up so easily. She waited near the stage door, hoping for an opportunity. Other people with special passes filtered through, chatting and laughing. They looked comfortable in this world of classical music and high society. Sarah felt like an outsider, invisible and insignificant. Nearly an hour passed. Sarah's feet hurt from standing, and she was beginning to lose hope. She was about to leave when the stage door suddenly opened. Marcus Wellington emerged, surrounded by several well-dressed people who were clearly his friends or colleagues. He was laughing at something someone had said, his demeanor relaxed now that the performance was over. Sarah's heart raced. This was her chance. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward. "Mr. Wellington?" she called out. Marcus stopped and turned toward her. His companions also turned, their conversations falling silent. For a moment, Sarah felt frozen under their collective gaze. She forced herself to continue. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a pianist too, and I've written a composition. I was hoping you might listen to it just for a few minutes. I've been teaching myself for years, and I would really value your opinion." Marcus studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then one of his companions, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and diamond earrings, laughed softly. Darling, everyone thinks they're a pianist, she said to Marcus. If you listened to every amateur who approached you, you'd never have time for anything else. Another man in the group chuckled. Self-taught, no less. How charming. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she held Marcus's gaze. He seemed to be considering her request, though his expression remained distant and professional. Finally, he spoke. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Miss Chen, but I'm afraid I don't have time this evening. I have dinner reservations and I've had a long day. Perhaps you should consider taking formal lessons before approaching professionals. There's a reason we spend years in conservatories. His words were polite but dismissive. Sarah felt as though she'd been slapped. She had known it was a long shot, but hearing the rejection spoken out loud hurt more than she expected. The people around Marcus seemed amused by the entire interaction, as if she were a child asking for an autograph rather than a serious musician seeking guidance. I understand, Sarah managed to say, her voice tight. Thank you for your time. She turned to walk away, but something inside her snapped. She had come too far and worked too hard to give up so easily. She spun back around, her embarrassment transforming into defiance. Actually, no, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. I didn't spend 3 hours on a bus and my last $50 on a ticket just to be dismissed like this. I may not have gone to a fancy conservatory, but I've spent thousands of hours studying music. I've learned every theory book I could get my hands on. I've analyzed the works of every master composer, and I've written something that I believe is worth hearing. The group fell silent again, but this time their amusement had shifted to surprise. Marcus raised an eyebrow, looking at Sarah with new interest. Marcus Wellington's expression shifted from mild irritation to curiosity. The young woman standing before him had fire in her eyes, something he rarely saw anymore in the polished students who came through prestigious music programs. They were technically perfect but often lacked passion. This girl, with her worn clothes and second-hand folders, seemed to burn with determination. You have spirit, I'll give you that, Marcus said, crossing his arms. But spirit doesn't replace years of proper training. Do you have any idea how many people approach me claiming they're the next great pianist? Talent without discipline is just noise. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had expected resistance, but his condescending tone made her blood boil. Then let me prove it, she said. Give me 5 minutes at a piano. If you think it's noise, I'll walk away and never bother you again. But if I'm right, if there's something worth hearing in my composition, you owe it to yourself as a musician to listen. The blonde woman from Marcus's group laughed again, a sharp sound that echoed in the empty hallway. Oh, this is entertaining. Marcus, surely you're not going to indulge this little performance. We have reservations at Le Bernardin in 30 minutes. But Marcus held up a hand to silence her. He studied Sarah's face, searching for something. Perhaps he saw a reflection of his younger self, before the fame and the fortune, when he too had been hungry and desperate to be heard. Or perhaps he was simply intrigued by her audacity. Either way, he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. All right, Miss Chen, he said. 5 minutes. There's a practice room down that corridor. But understand this, I won't waste my time being polite if what you play is mediocre. I'll tell you exactly what I think and you might not like it. Sarah's heart leaped. That's all I ask. Marcus turned to his companions. Go ahead to dinner without me. I'll meet you there shortly. They exchanged glances, clearly thinking he was making a mistake, but they knew better than to argue. As they walked away, Sarah heard the blonde woman mutter something about starving artists and their delusions. Marcus led Sarah down a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs of famous musicians who had performed at the hall over the decades. Their silent faces seemed to watch as Sarah followed the celebrated pianist, her worn folder clutched tightly against her chest. She could hardly believe this was happening. Just moments ago, she had been ready to give up and go home. Now she was about to play for one of the greatest pianists alive. They reached a small practice room. It was nothing like the grand concert hall, just a simple space with a piano, a few chairs, and soundproof walls. But to Sarah, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. Marcus flipped on the lights and gestured toward the piano, a well-maintained Steinway that gleamed under the fluorescent bulbs. Whenever you're ready, Marcus said, settling into one of the chairs. He pulled out his phone and set a timer for 5 minutes, placing it on his knee where Sarah could see it. The message was clear. She was on the clock. Sarah sat at the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly as she opened her folder. Inside were sheets of handwritten music, notes carefully penned during late nights after her waitressing shifts. The composition was called Fragments of Home, and she had poured every ounce of her experience into it. The struggle of working multiple jobs, the love for her younger brother, the dreams that kept her going when everything seemed hopeless. She positioned her hands over the keys and took a deep breath. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if Marcus was right? What if she was just another amateur with delusions of grandeur? But then she remembered why she was here. Music wasn't just a hobby for her. It was her voice, her way of making sense of the world. Whether Marcus appreciated it or not, this composition was real and honest and hers. Sarah began to play. The first notes were soft and hesitant, like someone waking from a dream. The melody was simple, almost childlike, representing the innocence of early memories. But then the composition shifted. The notes became more complex, weaving together different rhythms and harmonies that represented the chaos of adult life. There were moments of darkness where minor chords crashed against each other like waves during a storm. And there were moments of light where the melody soared with hope and defiance. Marcus sat forward in his chair, his expression changing from skeptical to attentive. He had expected amateur mistakes, timing issues, clumsy chord progressions, derivative melodies borrowed from more famous works. Instead, he was hearing something genuinely original. The technique wasn't perfect. Sarah's self-taught background showed in certain passages, but the emotional depth was undeniable. This wasn't someone trying to imitate the great composers. This was someone with something real to say. The middle section of the composition introduced a recurring theme that represented family. It was tender and melancholic, capturing both love and loss. Sarah's younger brother Tommy had been her responsibility, since their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. She was only 18 at the time, suddenly thrust into the role of guardian. Every note in this section reflected the weight of that responsibility, but also the fierce love that made it bearable. As the composition moved toward its conclusion, the various themes began to merge. The childhood innocence, the adult struggle, the family bonds, they all wove together into something greater than their individual parts. The final crescendo built with intensity, not through volume alone but through emotional complexity. And then, just when it seemed the music couldn't become any more powerful, Sarah brought it back down to a single, simple melody. The same notes from the beginning, but now they carried the weight of everything that had come before. When the final note faded into silence, Sarah lifted her hands from the keys. She didn't look at Marcus immediately. She needed a moment to compose herself, to return from the emotional journey the music had taken her on. Her heart was pounding, and she realized there were tears on her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by her display of emotion. Marcus said nothing. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Sarah finally turned to look at him, bracing herself for criticism or dismissal. But what she saw in his face surprised her. His expression was thoughtful, almost troubled, as if something about her music had unsettled him. "That's 5 minutes," Sarah said quietly. Seeing the timer on his phone had run out, Marcus looked down at his phone, then back at Sarah. "Tell me about your training," he said. "And don't lie. I want to know exactly how you learned to play like that." Sarah explained her story: the keyboard from the thrift store, the online tutorials, the library books on music theory, the hundreds of hours of practice squeezed into the gaps between work shifts. She told him about Tommy, about their parents, about the financial struggles that made professional lessons impossible. As she spoke, Marcus's expression remained unreadable. When she finished, Marcus stood and walked to the piano. He studied the handwritten sheet music, his experienced eyes analyzing every note and annotation. Sarah had written everything herself, composing directly on staff paper because she couldn't afford notation software. "You made mistakes," Marcus finally said. "Your fingering technique is inconsistent. Your dynamics could be more controlled, and there are passages where a trained pianist would make different choices." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known it was too good to be true. Of course, he would focus on the technical flaws rather than the substance of the music. Sarah began gathering her sheet music, ready to leave with what little dignity she had left. But before she could close her folder, Marcus continued speaking. "However," he said, and something in his tone made Sarah pause, "technical perfection can be taught. What you have, this raw emotional honesty, this genuine voice that cannot be taught. I've trained dozens of students who could play circles around you technically, but they've never made me feel anything. Your composition made me remember why I fell in love with music in the first place. Sarah looked up, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Marcus Wellington, the man who had dismissed her minutes ago, was now looking at her with something that resembled respect. I've been performing the same classical repertoire for 30 years, Marcus continued, sitting back down. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, the giants. I play them perfectly because that's what audiences expect. But somewhere along the way I stopped feeling the music. It became about precision, about maintaining my reputation, about selling tickets. Listening to you play just now, I realized how much I've lost. He ran a hand through his silver hair, suddenly looking older and more tired than before. Do you know what the worst part of success is, Miss Chen? You become afraid to take risks. Every performance has to be perfect because your reputation depends on it. You stop experimenting, stop growing, stop being vulnerable. You become a museum piece, valuable but lifeless. Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never imagined that someone like Marcus Wellington, famous, wealthy, celebrated, could feel trapped by his own success. In her mind, he had everything a musician could want. But now she was seeing a different side, the burden that came with perfection. I'm not saying your composition is flawless, Marcus said, picking up her sheet music again, but it's authentic. It comes from a real place, real experiences. That's more valuable than all the technical training in the world. Though, he added with a slight smile, you do need that technical training if you want to reach your full potential. Sarah's mind was racing. What are you saying? She asked carefully. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the music in his hands. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, as if he was figuring them out as he went along. I'm saying that perhaps we could help each other. You need proper training, technique, theory, performance practice. I need to remember what it feels like to create something new, to take risks again. I haven't taken on a private student in over a decade, but I'm willing to make an exception. Sarah felt the room spin. You want to teach me? On certain conditions, Marcus said firmly. This won't be easy. I'm not a gentle teacher, and I won't accept anything less than your complete dedication. You'll need to practice at least 4 hours a day, on top of whatever work schedule you maintain. We'll meet twice a week for lessons, and you'll need to be open to criticism even when it stings. Yes, Sarah said immediately. Yes, I can do all of that. I'm not finished, Marcus held up a hand. In return, I want you to teach me something too. I want you to help me compose again. I used to write my own music, years ago before the concerts and the recordings and the constant travel. I want to find that part of myself again, and I think you can help me do that. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Marcus Wellington wanted to learn from her. It seemed impossible, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. But the expression on his face was serious, almost vulnerable in a way that suggested this wasn't a casual offer. I don't understand, Sarah said. How could I possibly teach you anything? You're one of the greatest pianists in the world. Technically, yes, Marcus agreed. But you have something I lost a long time ago, courage. Courage to create without worrying about criticism. Courage to put your real feelings into music. Courage to stand up to people like me when we dismiss you. That kind of courage is worth more than perfect technique. He stood and extended his hand to Sarah. So, do we have an agreement? I teach you the classical tradition, you remind me how to take risks. Sarah shook his hand, her grip firm despite her trembling fingers. We have an agreement. Over the next several weeks, Sarah's life transformed in ways she never imagined possible. Marcus arranged for her to have access to a practice studio at a nearby music academy. It was a small room, but it had a beautiful piano and soundproof walls where she could practice without disturbing her neighbors. More importantly, it was a place dedicated solely to music, something she had never had before. Their first official lesson was humbling. Marcus immediately identified dozens of technical problems Sarah had developed from teaching herself. Her posture was wrong, causing unnecessary tension in her shoulders. Her finger positions were inconsistent, limiting her speed and control. She had gaps in her music theory knowledge that a first-year conservatory student would find basic. We have a lot of work to do, Marcus said after that first session, but his tone wasn't cruel. It was simply honest. But I've worked with students who had perfect technique and no soul. I'll take soul over technique any day because at least soul gives us something to work with. Sarah threw herself into the training with obsessive dedication. She woke up at 5 in the morning to practice before her office cleaning job. During her lunch break, she studied music theory textbooks Marcus had lent her. After her evening waitressing shift, she returned to the practice studio and played until her fingers were too tired to continue. She was exhausted, surviving on coffee and determination, but she had never been happier. Marcus was a demanding teacher, just as he had warned. He stopped her constantly during practice, correcting minute details of technique that Sarah hadn't even known were wrong. He made her repeat passages hundreds of times until they met his exacting standards. Sometimes she left lessons frustrated and discouraged, convinced she would never be good enough. But there were also moments of breakthrough that made all the struggle worthwhile. The first time she played a complicated Chopin nocturne correctly, Marcus actually smiled, a rare occurrence. When she mastered a particularly difficult fingering pattern he had been teaching her, he nodded with satisfaction and said, "Now you're starting to play like a real pianist." Meanwhile, Sarah kept her end of the bargain. Once a week, she and Marcus would meet not for a traditional lesson, but for a composition session. At first, Marcus was resistant, claiming he had forgotten how to create. But Sarah pushed him, using the same determination that had gotten her this far. "What are you feeling right now?" she would ask him. "Don't think about what audiences expect or what critics will say. Just tell me what emotion you want to express." It was slow going. Marcus had spent so many years performing other people's music that he had almost forgotten how to access his own creative voice. But gradually something began to shift. He started bringing small melodic ideas to their sessions, just a few measures at first, tentative and uncertain. Sarah would listen, offer suggestions, and encourage him to develop the ideas further. One evening, about 2 months into their arrangement, something remarkable happened. The practice studio was dimly lit, with only a small lamp casting warm light across the piano keys. Sarah had just finished working through a particularly difficult section of a listitude when Marcus arrived for their composition session. He looked different tonight, less polished, more disheveled. His usually perfect hair was slightly messy, and he wore a simple sweater instead of his typical formal attire. "I need to show you something," he said without preamble, sitting at the piano. He didn't give Sarah time to respond before his fingers touched the keys. What came out was unlike anything Sarah had heard Marcus play before. It wasn't a perfect, polished performance of a classical masterpiece. It was raw and unfinished, full of unexpected turns and moments of vulnerability. The melody wandered through different moods, nostalgic, angry, hopeful, melancholic, as if Marcus was working through emotions he had kept bottled up for years. He played for perhaps 10 minutes, completely absorbed in the music. When he finished, his hands remained on the keys, trembling slightly. Sarah sat in stunned silence. She had never seen Marcus so exposed, so human. "That was incredible," Sarah finally said. "Where did that come from?" Marcus took a deep breath, composing himself. "I wrote it last night. Couldn't sleep. So I went to the piano at 3 in the morning and just started playing. I didn't plan it, didn't think about structure or theory. I just let it flow." He looked at Sarah with an expression that was almost guilty. "It's probably terrible. Structurally unsound, harmonically questionable. All the things I would criticize in a student's work." "It's honest," Sarah said firmly. "That's what makes it powerful. Yes, you could refine it, polish the rough edges, but don't lose what makes it special, the fact that it comes from a real place." Marcus stood and paced the small room. "This is terrifying, you know. Performing other people's music, there's a safety in it. If someone criticizes the piece, they're criticizing Mozart or Beethoven, not me. But this," he gestured at the piano, "this is mine. If people hate it, they're hating something I created. Welcome to how I feel every time I show you my compositions," Sarah said with a small smile. "It's scary, but it's also the only way to create something meaningful. You can't protect yourself from criticism and be truly creative at the same time." Over the following months, their relationship evolved beyond teacher and student into something more like collaborators. Marcus continued to push Sarah's technical skills to new heights, but he also began asking her opinion on his own compositions. They would spend hours debating harmonic choices, arguing about tempo changes, challenging each other to take bigger creative risks. Sarah's playing improved dramatically under Marcus's tutelage. Her technique became more refined, her understanding of music theory deepened, and her interpretations of classical pieces gained sophistication. But she never lost the emotional authenticity that had impressed Marcus in the first place. If anything, proper training gave her more tools to express what she had always felt. Marcus, meanwhile, was experiencing a creative renaissance. He composed a full piano sonata, then a string quartet, then a series of smaller pieces that experimented with unconventional structures. His management was baffled when he asked to include some of his own compositions in his concert programs, but Marcus insisted. For the first time in decades, he was excited about performing, not just executing perfect renditions of famous works, but sharing something of himself. But not everyone was happy about these changes. The blonde woman who had mocked Sarah at their first meeting, Charlotte Vanderbilt, a prominent patron of the arts and longtime friend of Marcus, began expressing concerns. She attended one of Marcus's concerts where he premiered one of his new compositions, and she was not impressed. "Darling, what are you doing?" She cornered him after the performance. "That piece you played, your own composition, it was so strange. Not at all what people expect from you. And I heard you're spending all your time with that self-taught girl. People are starting to talk." Marcus bristled at her tone. "Let them talk. I'm finally creating again, Charlotte. Can't you understand what that means to me?" "What I understand is that you're risking your reputation," Charlotte said sharply. "You're Marcus Wellington. People come to your concerts because they know exactly what they're going to get. Perfection. Not experimental nonsense and amateur hour." Other people in Marcus's circle echoed Charlotte's concerns. Concert promoters worried that his new direction would hurt ticket sales. Critics who had always praised his flawless technique didn't know what to make of his original compositions. Some of them were kind, calling his new work interesting or ambitious. Others were brutal, suggesting that Marcus should stick to what he did best, interpreting the masters. The criticism stung, but Marcus refused to back down. For the first time in his career, he was doing something that mattered to him, not just to his audience or his critics, and he had Sarah to thank for it. One evening, about 6 months into their arrangement, Marcus invited Sarah to his apartment. It was the first time she had seen where he lived, a spacious penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The centerpiece of the main room was a magnificent grand piano, the kind most musicians could only dream of owning. "I have a proposition for you," Marcus said as they sat in his elegant living room. "There's a prestigious competition coming up in 3 months, the International Young Artist Competition. It's one of the most respected contests in the classical music world. Winners receive a cash prize, a recording contract, and concerts scheduled at major venues around the world." Sarah's heart began to race. She had heard of this competition. It was incredibly competitive, with applicants from the world's top conservatories. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to enter," Marcus said simply. "I think you're ready." Sarah laughed, thinking he must be joking. But when she saw his serious expression, her laughter died. "Marcus, I've only been studying with you for 6 months. Those other competitors have been training their entire lives at places like Juilliard and the Royal Academy. I can't possibly compete with them." "You're right that you can't match them technically," Marcus agreed. "There will be pianists in that competition who have more advanced technique than you. But technique isn't everything. You have something they lack, a genuine artistic voice. Your interpretations come from real-life experience, not just from studying in a practice room. That gives you an edge they can't match." Sarah wanted to believe him, but the self-doubt was overwhelming. She had come so far in 6 months, but was it really enough? What if I embarrass myself? What if I embarrass you? The only way you could embarrass me is by not trying, Marcus said firmly. I've spent my whole career playing it safe, and look where it got me. Successful but hollow. You taught me that taking risks is what makes art matter. Now I'm asking you to take a risk. Enter the competition. Play your heart out. Show those conservatory students that music isn't just about perfect technique. Sarah thought about everything she had been through to get to this point. The years of teaching herself on a cheap keyboard. The long hours working multiple jobs. The night she confronted Marcus at the concert hall, refusing to be dismissed. If she had taken the safe path, she never would have gotten this far. Why stop taking risks now? Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it, Marcus smiled, one of his rare, genuine smiles. Good, then we have a lot of work to do. The competition requires 3 pieces. A Baroque work, a Romantic piece, and a contemporary composition of the performer's choice. We need to select your repertoire carefully and prepare you for the pressure of performing in front of judges. The next 3 months were the most intense of Sarah's life. Sarah had to reduce her hours at both jobs, which meant living on even less money than before. Tommy, her younger brother, had started working part-time at a grocery store to help cover expenses, insisting he could handle it along with his high school classes. Sarah felt guilty accepting his help, but she knew this opportunity might never come again. For the Baroque piece, Marcus helped her select Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C-sharp minor. It was technically demanding, but would showcase her growing skill with counterpoint and voice leading. The romantic piece was Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a work that required both technical brilliance and emotional depth. But the most important choice was the contemporary piece. After much discussion, they decided Sarah would perform her own composition, Fragments of Home. "Are you sure?" Sarah had asked when Marcus first suggested it. "Wouldn't it be safer to choose something by an established composer?" "Safe won't win you this competition," Marcus had replied. "There will be dozens of talented pianists playing the same famous contemporary pieces. But only you can play your composition with complete authenticity. It's a risk, but it's the right kind of risk." So Sarah revised and refined Fragments of Home, incorporating everything she had learned from Marcus about structure and development while keeping the emotional core intact. The piece evolved, becoming more sophisticated without losing its raw honesty. Marcus helped her with orchestration ideas, suggesting ways to bring out different voices and create more dynamic contrast. The practice regimen was brutal. Sarah worked with Marcus on interpretation, learning how to bring out the architecture of Bach's Fugue, how to navigate the dramatic shifts in the Chopin Ballade. They worked on performance psychology too, how to manage nerves, how to recover from mistakes, how to project confidence even when feeling uncertain. In competition, judges are looking for more than just correct notes, Marcus explained during one lesson. They're looking for artistry, for a unique interpretive vision. Don't just play the notes on the page. Tell a story. Make them feel something. Sarah also had to get comfortable performing under pressure. Marcus arranged for her to play in front of small audiences, first just a handful of his colleagues, then larger groups. Each performance was terrifying, but Sarah gradually learned to channel her nerves into energy rather than letting them paralyze her. As the competition date approached, Sarah's anxiety intensified. She lay awake at night running through passages in her mind, worrying about memory slips or technical breakdowns. Tommy noticed her stress and tried to help by making her favorite meals and forcing her to take breaks from practicing. "You're going to be amazing," he told her one evening as they shared a simple dinner of pasta and salad in their small apartment. "I've heard you play, Sarah. You're the real deal." "You're my brother," Sarah said with a tired smile. "You have to say that." "I'm saying it because it's true," Tommy insisted. "Do you remember when you first brought home that old keyboard? I was 6 years old and you spent hours figuring out how to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star just to make me happy. You've always had this gift for making music mean something. That hasn't changed." His words meant more to Sarah than he probably realized. She had been so focused on technical improvement and competition preparation that she had almost forgotten why she loved music in the first place. Because it connected people, because it expressed things words couldn't capture, because it made life feel less lonely. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. It was being held in the grand concert hall where Sarah had first met Marcus, a detail that felt both fitting and intimidating. When Sarah arrived that morning, the hall was buzzing with activity. Young pianists from around the world were warming up in practice rooms, their handlers and teachers hovering nearby with last-minute advice. Everyone looked confident and professional in their concert attire. Sarah wore a simple black dress that Tommy had helped her pick out from a consignment shop. It wasn't designer fashion, but it was elegant and allowed her to move comfortably at the piano. Marcus met her in the lobby, his presence immediately calming her nerves. "Remember," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "this isn't about being perfect. It's about being authentic. Play from your heart, and everything else will follow." The competition format was straightforward but grueling. Each performer would play their 3 pieces in front of a panel of 5 judges, all distinguished musicians and teachers. The performances were spread across 2 days, with 20 competitors in total. Sarah was scheduled for the afternoon of the second day, late enough that the wait would be agonizing, but early enough that she wouldn't be the final performer. Sarah spent the first day watching other competitors from the audience. They were impressive, exactly as she had feared. A young man from Russia played Rachmaninoff with stunning virtuosity. A woman from Japan performed Debussy with exquisite sensitivity. A German pianist tackled Beethoven with powerful authority. Sarah felt her confidence eroding with each performance. These people were extraordinary, products of the world's finest music programs. How could she possibly compete? That evening, Marcus found her sitting alone in one of the practice rooms, staring at the piano without playing. "Having doubts?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bench. "I don't belong here," Sarah said quietly. "Every person I watched today was incredible. They've studied at conservatories since they were children. They have teachers and resources I never had. I'm fooling myself thinking I can compete with them." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then he began to speak. 25 years ago, I won this exact competition. I was 20 years old, fresh from studying at the Vienna Conservatory. My technique was flawless. My interpretations were scholarly, and I played every note exactly as my teachers had instructed. I won, and it launched my career. He paused, looking at the piano. "But you know what? I don't remember feeling anything when I played. I was so focused on executing perfectly that I forgot to connect with the music emotionally. I won because I didn't make mistakes, not because I moved anyone. And that's been my career ever since. Technically perfect, but emotionally safe." Marcus turned to face Sarah directly. "You're right that you might not have the most advanced technique in this competition. But you have something more important. When you play, people feel something. Your music comes from real life, real struggle, real emotion. That's worth more than any conservatory degree." Sarah wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there. What if the judges don't see it that way? What if they only care about technical perfection? "Then they're not the judges I think they are," Marcus said. "But either way, you need to play for yourself, not for them. You've already accomplished something remarkable. You've learned to speak through music in an authentic way. Don't abandon that now just because you're scared of being judged." Sarah took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. He was right. She had come too far to start playing it safe now. Tomorrow she would walk onto that stage and play with everything she had, regardless of what the judges thought. The next morning, Sarah woke early and went through her usual pre-performance routine. Light breakfast, warm-up exercises, mental run-through of her pieces. Tommy hugged her before she left for the concert hall, telling her he would be in the audience watching. Marcus was already there when she arrived, reviewing the schedule with quiet confidence. Sarah watched the morning performers, trying to stay calm and focused. They were all excellent, further proof of the high level of competition. When her turn finally came, a stagehand called her name and led her to the wings. She could hear the previous performer finishing their final piece to strong applause. Then it was time. Sarah walked onto the stage, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The concert hall seemed even more massive from the performer's perspective, with hundreds of seats rising up into the shadows. The grand piano sat in the center of the stage under a bright spotlight, waiting. In the front row, she could see the 5 judges sitting behind a long table, their faces neutral and professional. Marcus sat several rows back, his expression calm and encouraging. She spotted Tommy further back, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up. She sat at the piano and adjusted the bench to her preferred height. The judges waited patiently, giving her time to settle. Sarah placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself. This was it. Everything she had worked for condensed into the next 30 minutes. She began with the Bach prelude and fugue. Her fingers moved through the intricate counterpoint with precision that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Marcus's training had given her the technical foundation to execute these complex passages cleanly. But more importantly, she played with understanding. She heard each voice in the fugue as a conversation, different perspectives weaving together to create something larger than themselves. When she finished the Bach, there was respectful applause from the audience. One of the judges, an older woman with silver hair, made a note on her score sheet, her expression unreadable. Sarah took a breath and moved to the second piece. The Chopin Ballade was her opportunity to showcase romantic expression, alongside technical skill. She had lived with this piece for 3 months, studying every recording she could find, analyzing the structure with Marcus, practicing until her interpretation felt natural rather than calculated. Now, as she played, she let herself sink into the music's emotional landscape. The gentle opening that bloomed into passionate declarations, the turbulent middle section that felt like a storm of conflicting emotions, the triumphant conclusion that brought all the themes together in a rush of energy. She could feel the audience leaning forward in their seats. Even the judges seemed more engaged now, their professional neutrality cracking slightly. When the final chord faded, the applause was warmer, more enthusiastic. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. 2 pieces down, 1 to go, but this last piece was the one that mattered most. Fragments of Home was her statement, her truth. As she prepared to play it, Sarah felt a flutter of doubt. What if the judges dismissed original compositions? What if they thought her music was amateurish compared to the established masterworks everyone else was performing? Then she remembered Marcus's words, "Play for yourself, not for them." Sarah began playing her composition, and immediately she was transported back to the moments that had inspired it. The opening section, with its simple melody, took her back to being 7 years old and finding that keyboard at the thrift store. She remembered the wonder she felt pressing the keys and hearing sound emerge, like discovering she had a voice she never knew existed. As the piece progressed, the music reflected her journey, the loss of her parents, the sudden responsibility of caring for Tommy, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the stubborn hope that kept her practicing even when success seemed impossible. Every note carried a memory. Every phrase expressed something she couldn't put into words. The middle section, which represented family, made her think of Tommy sitting in the audience watching his sister chase an impossible dream. She thought of the sacrifices he had made, taking that grocery store job so she could reduce her hours and practice more. She thought of the nights they sat together in their small apartment, him doing homework while she played that old keyboard, both of them building their futures one small step at a time. The final crescendo built with all the emotions she had accumulated over the years. Frustration, determination, love, fear, and hope all swirling together. And then, like coming home after a long journey, she brought the music back down to that simple opening melody. But now it carried the weight of everything she had experienced, every struggle and every small victory. When the final note faded into silence, Sarah lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, the hall was completely quiet. Sarah's heart sank. Had they hated it? Was the silence disapproval? Then the applause started. It began with a few people but quickly grew, spreading through the audience like a wave. People were standing up, something Sarah hadn't seen happen for any of the other performers. She looked at the judges and saw something she didn't expect. Several of them were clearly moved. The silver-haired woman was wiping her eyes. Another judge, a younger man, was clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Sarah stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She looked for Marcus and found him standing in the audience, applauding with a proud smile on his face. Tommy was beside himself with excitement, clapping and cheering louder than anyone else. As Sarah left the stage, her hands were shaking, not from nerves this time, but from the intensity of what had just happened. She had poured everything she had into that performance, holding nothing back. Win or lose, she knew she had done something real. The remaining competitors performed throughout the afternoon. Each one was talented in their own way, offering polished interpretations of famous works. But Sarah noticed something. Many of their performances, while technically impressive, felt safe. They were executing the notes correctly but not taking any risks, not revealing anything personal. After all the performances were complete, the judges deliberated for what felt like hours. The competitors and their families waited anxiously in the lobby. Sarah sat with Marcus and Tommy, trying not to obsess over every detail of her performance. "You played beautifully," Marcus said for the 3rd time. "Whatever happens next doesn't change that." "He's right," Tommy added. "I've never heard you play like that. It was like you were telling our whole story up there." Finally, the announcement came. Everyone filed back into the concert hall for the awards ceremony. The head judge, a distinguished composer in his 70s, stood at the podium to announce the results. "This year's competition featured exceptional talent from around the world," he began. "Our deliberations were difficult because the level of playing was uniformly high. However, 3 performers stood out to the judging panel." He announced the 3rd-place winner, the young man from Russia who had played Rachmaninoff so brilliantly. The 2nd-place winner was the Japanese woman whose Debussy had been exquisite. Both were deserving recipients, and Sarah applauded genuinely for them. "And now for 1st place," the head judge continued. "This was a unanimous decision from the judging panel, which is quite rare. We were looking for more than just technical proficiency. We wanted to find an artist with a unique voice, someone who could move us emotionally while also demonstrating solid musicianship. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone around her must be able to hear it. She gripped Tommy's hand tightly. The first place winner of this year's International Young Artist Competition is Sarah Chen. For a moment, Sarah couldn't process what she had heard. Tommy was hugging her. Marcus was shaking her shoulder and people around them were applauding. Then it hit her, she had won. She had actually won. Sarah walked to the stage in a daze to accept her award. The head judge handed her a trophy and an envelope containing the prize details, then asked her to say a few words. Sarah stood at the microphone looking out at the audience and suddenly felt tears threatening to spill over. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice shaking slightly. 6 months ago, I was just someone who taught herself piano because I loved music. I never imagined I could be standing here today. I want to thank Marcus Wellington for taking a chance on me when he had no reason to, and I want to thank my brother Tommy for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. She paused, gathering her thoughts. To everyone watching, if you have a dream that seems impossible, if people tell you that you can't do something because you don't have the right background or training, don't listen to them. Work harder than everyone else. Find people who believe in you, and most importantly, stay true to your own voice. That's the only thing that really matters. The weeks following the competition were a whirlwind. The prize package included a recording contract with a prestigious classical music label, scheduled performances at major concert halls across the country, and enough prize money that Sarah could finally quit both her jobs and focus entirely on music. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the opportunity the win provided for other aspiring musicians. Sarah received hundreds of messages from people who had watched videos of her competition performance online. Many were self-taught musicians like herself, people who had been told they weren't good enough because they hadn't followed the traditional path. Her story gave them hope. Marcus watched his students' success with mixed feelings. He was proud of Sarah, of course, proud of how far she had come in such a short time, proud that she had stayed true to herself even under pressure. But he also felt a tinge of regret for all the years he had spent playing it safe, never taking the kinds of risks Sarah took every time she sat at a piano. "You changed my life," he told Sarah during one of their lessons a few weeks after the competition. "I want you to know that. I was successful but empty before we met. You reminded me why I became a musician in the first place." Sarah smiled. "You changed mine too. I had passion but no direction. You gave me the tools to express what I was feeling. We helped each other." Marcus had continued composing, and he was now working on his most ambitious project yet, a full piano concerto that would premiere with a major symphony orchestra the following season. The musical establishment that had once dismissed his original works was now paying attention. Critics who had been skeptical were starting to acknowledge that Marcus Wellington, the composer, was just as interesting as Marcus Wellington, the performer. The blonde woman, Charlotte Vanderbilt, who had mocked Sarah at their first meeting, attended one of Sarah's post-competition concerts out of curiosity. She sat in the audience as Sarah performed a program that mixed classical masterworks with her own compositions. When the concert ended, Charlotte approached Sarah at the reception. "I owe you an apology," Charlotte said, her tone lacking its usual condescension. "When we first met, I dismissed you without giving you a chance. I thought Marcus was making a mistake wasting his time with an amateur. I was wrong. What you did tonight, that was extraordinary." Sarah accepted the apology gracefully, though she couldn't help feeling some satisfaction at Charlotte's change of heart. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. I hope you'll forgive an old snob for being narrow-minded," Charlotte continued. "The truth is, I've been around classical music my whole life and I've become jaded. I forgot that music is supposed to make you feel something, not just impress you technically. You reminded me of that." As Sarah's career took off, she made a conscious decision about the kind of musician she wanted to be. She could have easily become another performer who played the standard repertoire at prestigious venues, collecting accolades and paychecks. But that wasn't enough for her. She wanted to use her platform to help other musicians who were struggling like she had been. Sarah started offering free workshops for self-taught musicians, sharing the techniques Marcus had taught her. She created online tutorials and written resources, making classical music education more accessible to people who couldn't afford private lessons. She also made a point of programming her own compositions alongside classical works in her concerts, showing audiences that contemporary music could be just as moving as the masterpieces of the past. Tommy graduated high school with honors and received a scholarship to study engineering at a good university. The prize money from Sarah's competition win meant he didn't have to work his way through college the way Sarah had worked her way through life. On the day he left for college, Sarah drove him to campus in a used car she had finally been able to afford. "You know this is all because of you," Tommy said as they unloaded boxes from the car. "If you hadn't taken care of me after Mom and Dad died, if you hadn't sacrificed everything to give me a stable life, I wouldn't be here." "We took care of each other," Sarah corrected him. "You supported my dreams even when they seemed crazy. That means everything." Marcus and Sarah continued working together, but their relationship had evolved. They were no longer simply teacher and student, they were colleagues, collaborators, friends. They pushed each other creatively, challenged each other's assumptions, and celebrated each other's successes. Marcus's composition career flourished, and several of his works were performed by major orchestras. Sarah's concert schedule filled up months in advance, with venues eager to present the pianist who had captured the public's imagination with her compelling story and authentic musicality. 1 year after the competition, Sarah returned to the same concert hall where she had first confronted Marcus. But this time, she wasn't sneaking in through the back entrance or begging for 5 minutes of someone's time. She was the featured performer, scheduled to give a solo recital in the same space where she had once been dismissed as an amateur. The concert was sold out, with people eager to hear the pianist who had gone from self-taught musician to competition winner in less than a year. As Sarah walked onto the stage, she felt a moment of vertigo, remembering the scared young woman who had stood in this hall 12 months ago, clutching a worn folder and hoping someone would listen to her music. She sat at the piano and looked out at the audience. Marcus was there, of course, sitting in the front row with a proud smile. Tommy was next to him, home from college for the weekend, and scattered throughout the audience were dozens of people she had never met. Musicians and music lovers who had been inspired by her story, who had taken their own leaps of faith because she had taken hers. Sarah began to play, starting the recital with Fragments of Home, the composition that had changed her life. As her fingers moved across the keys, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of teaching herself on a cheap keyboard, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the night she found the courage to confront a famous pianist who had every reason to dismiss her. The months of intense training that followed. The terrifying moment of walking onto a competition stage and playing from her heart. Every struggle, every doubt, every small victory had led to this moment. And as the music filled the concert hall, Sarah realized something profound. She wasn't playing for the critics anymore, or for the judges, or even for the audience. She was playing for that 7-year-old girl who had discovered a keyboard at a thrift store and fallen in love with the magic of making music. She was playing for every person who had been told they weren't good enough, that they didn't have the right background, that they should give up on their dreams. But most of all, she was playing because she had to, because music was her voice, her truth, her way of making sense of the world. Success was wonderful, the opportunities, the recognition, the financial security. But those things weren't why she played. She played because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. As the final notes of Fragments of Home faded into silence, the audience erupted in applause. Sarah stood and bowed, but her eyes were drawn to Marcus, who was standing and applauding with tears streaming down his face. In that moment, Sarah understood that their relationship had saved both of them, her from obscurity, him from emptiness. The concert continued with a program that mixed Beethoven and Chopin with several of Sarah's original compositions and one of Marcus's new works. Each piece felt like a conversation between past and present, tradition and innovation, technical perfection, and emotional authenticity. The audience responded with standing ovations after nearly every piece. After the concert, Sarah met with fans and aspiring musicians who had come to thank her for inspiring them. A teenage girl approached shyly, clutching sheet music she had written herself. "I taught myself piano too," the girl said, "but I was afraid to show anyone my compositions because I thought they'd laugh at me. After I saw you win that competition, I realized I had to at least try." Sarah looked at the girl's sheet music, remembering when she had been in exactly the same position. "Promise me you'll keep composing," she said. "The world needs your voice even if it takes time to find an audience. Especially if it takes time." Later that evening, Sarah and Marcus sat together in a quiet corner of the reception hall. The crowds had mostly dispersed, leaving just the two of them with glasses of champagne they were too tired to drink. "When I first heard you play," Marcus said quietly, "I heard something I had forgotten existed. Pure, unfiltered artistic expression. No pretense, no calculation, just honest emotion turned into music. That terrified me because it showed me everything I had lost." "You found it again," Sarah said. "Your new compositions prove that." "Only because you showed me the way back," Marcus replied. "I spent decades being Marcus Wellington, the famous pianist. Somewhere along the way I forgot to be Marcus Wellington, the human being who loves music. You reminded me that those two things have to exist together. Technical perfection without emotional truth is just noise, no matter how correctly you play the notes." Sarah thought about how far they had both come since that night when she had confronted him outside this very concert hall. She had gained technical skills and professional opportunities she never dreamed possible. But Marcus had gained something too, the courage to be vulnerable again, to create rather than just recreate, to risk failure in pursuit of something meaningful. "We make a good team," Sarah said with a smile. "The best," Marcus agreed. "So what's next for you? More concerts? Another composition?" Sarah looked around the elegant concert hall, thinking about all the people she had met tonight who were inspired by her story. "I want to start a foundation," she said. "Something that provides instruments, lessons, and opportunities for talented musicians who can't afford traditional training. I had to fight so hard for every opportunity, and I got lucky that you took a chance on me. Other people deserve those chances too." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's a wonderful idea. Count me in as your first donor and as someone who can help recruit teachers. We'll call it the Fragments Foundation, after your composition. A place where musicians can gather all the fragments of their dreams and turn them into something whole." As they sat together planning this new venture, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude and purpose. Her journey from self-taught amateur to professional musician had been harder than anything she could have imagined, but it had also been worth every moment of struggle, every hour of practice, every leap of faith. She had proven that talent and determination could overcome lack of formal training. She had shown that authentic emotional expression was just as important as technical perfection. And most importantly, she had learned that taking risks, standing up for yourself, believing in your abilities even when others doubt you, staying true to your artistic vision, was the only way to create something that truly mattered. The concert hall was empty now except for the cleaning crew beginning their work. Sarah and Marcus stood to leave, but Sarah paused at the stage door looking back at the piano sitting silent under a single spotlight. That instrument had been both her greatest challenge and her greatest gift. It had demanded everything she had to give, and in return it had given her a voice that reached people's hearts. Tomorrow there would be more concerts, more compositions, more students to teach and inspire, but tonight Sarah simply felt grateful for the music, for Marcus's mentorship, for Tommy's unwavering support, and for the courage she had found within herself to demand that the world listen to what she had to say. As she walked out into the cool night air, Sarah smiled. The famous pianist had laughed at her once, dismissing her as just another amateur with delusions of grandeur. But she had played a song that left everyone speechless, including him. And in doing so, she had changed both their lives forever.